There is a fifth dimension,
about the unknown,
beyond that which is known to man.
The Garden of Thought.
The Babylon Project was our last best hope for peace.
Unexplained.
Mythologies.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
The Garden of Thought with Jeff Lippman.
Eventually, our sun will grow cold and go out.
Whether a thought is spoken or not, it is a real thing, and it has power.
It won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe and Lao Tzu and Einstein and Morobuto.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.
All of us was for nothing. Unless we go to the stars.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name.
The Garden of Thought.
Welcome everyone into the Garden of Thought, midweek edition. And this week we're going back into the area of focusing on mostly law. We've sort of strayed from that for a few weeks, which is fine. And you know, there seems to be a lot of a lot of feeling that our skies are not as safe as they once were, and that may or may not be accurate. We have covered various aspects of aviation law on the show. Primarily in the beginning was to sort of extrapolate what it might be like in space. So we talked to air traffic controllers, we talked to the two retired Air Force general who ran Dulles for 14 years, and then of course Tom Dunlop from my firm, well rather his firm, who talked about aviation law proper. Now we're going to talk to Robert Schulte, who's a lawyer in Maryland. He's been a lawyer for 30 years or more, and he practices, along with probably some of the areas we talked about, another area of aviation law. So, Robert, thanks very much for joining, and tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
All right, Jeff, thank you for having me. As you indicated, I've been practicing law for about 30 years, most of that in the aviation arena. It's not nearly as sexy or as exciting as it sounds. But aviation law, by definition, is mostly federal law. Obviously, when we're talking about accident litigation, that will involve certain components of state law. But on balance, it really covers three basic areas. Most people probably think aviation lawyers deal with exclusively crash litigation. Obviously, we do. But there's a whole body of law out there that's probably invisible to most of the general public, and that deals with what we call certificate actions. FAA licensees, people that hold pilot's license, mechanics licenses, people that hold air operating certificates, and that includes the airlines, Part 121 of the Federal Aviation Regulations, or Part 135, where most people would understand to be on-demand charters. They have licenses from the FAA. In order to get those licenses, they expend significant sums of money. And so in order to protect those licenses, sometimes they need to go toe-to-toe with the FAA in these so-called certificate actions. Our firm and many firms like mine, certainly not exclusively our firm, will defend those interests against FAA enforcement actions. They can run the gamut from the FAA trying to suspend a pilot's license for a period of time to revoking an air charter certificate, which could cost a company literally millions and millions of dollars. So the point being is that there can often be a lot at stake in those types of proceedings.
Yeah, I think we should probably point out to the audience that you are, in fact, a pilot. You're talking to us right now from what appears to be a hangar, and there's definitely a plane behind you with the call numbers. I'm not going to read them for security purposes, but there's a fin there, and or the tail fin, I guess that's what it's called, and all of that other good stuff. So, are you a commercial pilot, or?
I am, and everybody in our firm's a pilot. So we, for lack of a better word, do walk the walk and talk the talk. And of course, aviation's always been a passion of mine. The law part of this is really quite a corollary to my first love, and that is flying. And of course, I jealously protect both mine and my clients' rights to continue doing just that.
Okay, very good. All right. So, I guess maybe basics, the licensing being difficult to get makes sense. You want to sort of have some barrier to easy entry into this marketplace. But what are the basic criteria?
anybody can be a pilot if they want, but I think the point I was driving at earlier is that, by the time you become a commercial pilot, you've probably invested well over $100,000 in those licenses.
Right.
So it's significant. But, you go to a flight school. There's different types of flight schools, but on balance, you don't have to necessarily go to college, although most commercial operators do prefer folks with college degrees these days. But it's a long process. It takes about as long to get a useful commercial pilot's license as it does to get a law degree. Maybe even more, and in some cases, it might even be more expensive.
Are there any shortcuts?
It's no small thing.
Like if you're in the Air Force and you were a pilot in the Air Force, do can you automatically get a commercial license, or is there like a bridge test? Sort of like if you're a lawyer and you take a lawyer's bar in another state, or is it, nope, you got to go through the same thing?
Certainly the skills that an Air Force pilot learns in the military are transferable to the civilian world. They're not directly transferable. Yes, you will have to go through additional training and certification, but yes, you're ahead of the game if that's what you're suggesting. But bear in mind that most pilots do not come out of the military. There was a time that was true probably shortly after Vietnam. A lot of those gentlemen, and unfortunately at the time it was almost exclusively gentlemen, did come out and go to the airlines. That pool is largely dried up. And the fact of the matter is, these days, the military aircraft that are being flown are so highly specialized that the transference of skills is very limited. And also the folks that are leaving the military to go to the airlines are few and far between. The fact of the matter is the military, salary-wise, is competing with the civilian market for pilots. And so, pilots back in the day really weren't paid much in the military. Now they are significantly well. And so a lot of, military pilots opt to stay and do their full 20 or 30 years and retire.
I have a question for you, and you may have absolutely no idea what the answer is. And the only reason I'm asking you is not as a gotcha, is just because I only heard about it today. I saw it on one of those blurbs. I get like Science Alert or whatever. I got an email with like 8 stories a day or whatever. And one of them was that Space Force's secret plane has landed after a year, or aircraft, not plane, has landed after a year, which takes me back to the West Wing in the 90s when they had astronauts stuck up there, and they're like, send the military shuttle. I'm like, there is no military shuttle. Wait, there's a military shuttle? So, I mean, do you know anything about the Space Force aircraft?
I know a little bit about it. And don't quote me on this. I think it's a Boeing aircraft. It's an unmanned aircraft. Basically, it's a big, heavy drone. Do I know what its purpose is? No. More likely than not, it's surveillance-based. But it's an unmanned aircraft. And yeah, they had it up there for about a year. It's interesting, but they're being rather tight-lipped about what it's all about. But it's just another big. It's based on the same technology as space shuttle. It's a much smaller vehicle, but specifically, no, I do not know what his purpose is for.
Yeah. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I like it when our branches of the military and similar services have secrets and have secret technology that most not everybody knows about. Even if you want, I mean, people have been talking about Blackbird and secret aircrafts for decades now and whatnot, but it's still nice to know it's there. And I'm not sure if it just had to land or come down, or if it's one of those things where, we had the drone phenomena and UFO mania was revved up again. And it's sort of like saying, nah, this is our tech. It's also some of our adversaries have similar tech. I wonder if this is just one of those things to let them know, don't panic. We've got stuff too. The Chinese balloon that floated over the sky for, the country.
Sure. I spent a fair amount of time in the Army. What I can tell you is that whatever we know as a matter of public discourse, what our military capabilities are, they're generally far in excess of that in reality.
Good. I mean, yeah, and I mean it. Okay, let's get back to you and the topic at hand, more to the point. So, the way we met is that every now and then, every 2 or 3 years, I put a post on the Maryland Facebook lawyers group, and I say, hey, I've got this podcast. Any of you do anything interesting? And there's always a whole bunch of people who respond, and they actually do really interesting things, and it's always really cool, and it's always really surprising. And so when we were going to talk about, you mentioned I think that we were going to focus mostly on sort of torts, air safety, whatever the regulations are about, airplane crashes. And, as you pointed out at the time, there were 2 crashes in near proximity. There's been like 3. I mean, I am not trying to put this on the Trump administration at all, because they basically got there was an inauguration and 2 planes went down. I'm sorry. That's nobody's fault. I mean, it's somebody's fault, but it's not the new president's fault, regardless of what I think of Trump or not. But there's been sort of, it feels like a lot, but when we were talking pre-production, like, it's really not more than normal. It just feels that way. I don't know if you want to elaborate that. Just lead the conversation.
To your earlier point, as we all know in this business, correlation does not equal causation, right? 2 very different things. I will agree from a outsider's point of view, there seems to be a lot of events happening lately. Not unusual at all. Unfortunate, but not unusual. The incident over the Potomac was a tragedy of significant portions for a variety of reasons. To be fair, the accident investigation is not over, and I'm not going to sit here and opine and tell you that I know what the cause is. I don't. I'll let the professionals deal with that, and indeed the lawyers are already getting spun up on that anyway. But yes, we had the incident in Toronto. Obviously, we had the incident in the Potomac. There's been a couple of light air crashes recently, including one just up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, either yesterday or the day before yesterday. What goes up must come down. Sometimes it doesn't come down the way that we would like. Aviation, by definition, is risk. The FAA's mandate is to promote air safety. That mandate came about as a result of, among other things, the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. And among other things, that act created the modern FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, as we know it. And that gave the administration the mandate to pass rules and regulations to regulate air safety. The air safety regulations are codified at 14 CFR 1.1 et sec. They're about yay thick, and when I say yay thick, about 3 or 4 telephone books thick. They govern everything from the manner in which pilots are trained to how aircraft are made. To sit down and read those things would give you a migraine of epic proportions. But each and every regulation, as is often said in this business, is written in blood. They generally are the result of very specific events. And my guess is, as a result of the accident over the Potomac, you're probably going to see a change in behavior and probably some changes in certain regulations that deal with the manner in which military aircraft interact with civilian aircraft. That's a huge problem. It's been one for a while. Yes, the most of aviation law is federal. The standards of care are generally federal. But a lot of these cases do end up in state courts, with state courts applying federal law to these particular cases. Obviously, if there's diversity of citizenship and things of this nature, then yes, they bounce back up in the federal court. But it's not unusual to see air crash litigation taking place in state courts. They're just using federal standards of care as the, for lack of a better, negligence overlay.
Right. So I assume that over the years, there's a pretty firm definition of what the standard of care is that probably gets revisited every few years as technology and training gets better?
There is, sure. I mean, aircraft are changing all the time. Technology is changing all the time. The manner in which we train pilots changes over the time. There was a very famous crash a couple of years back called Colgan Air 3407. Doesn't really matter. It was a small commuter aircraft. It was landing in Buffalo, New York. It was in bad weather, specifically icing weather. Icing is probably one of the biggest threats to aircraft in the air. As one of my flight instructors told me once, that ice does 2 things to aircraft. It changes the shape of the wing, it makes them heavier, and nothing good will come of that. Right. And so what happened was the aircraft stalled. It simply accumulated too much ice to be able to stay in the air. And the pilots on board, unfortunately, pretty much did everything wrong by the numbers and ended up killing about 52 people. It was a very tragic accident, but like all aviation accidents, it wasn't the result of one thing. Anybody in this business understands that when an airplane accident happens, it's usually the culmination of many, many factors. In this case, this started years before, about relaxed training standards, about not really allowing operators to talk about their experiences with different pilots. In other words, if you had a guy or a gal out there who really wasn't measuring up, no one talked about it. They just terminated him and they moved on somewhere else and made him someone else's problem. The problem in that set of circumstances is the people in the back of that aircraft don't know that.
Right.
And somebody needed to be looking out for them. And that somebody should have been the FAA. And they didn't, because of those relaxed standards. And these relaxed standards came about because industry pressured the FAA to relax the standards. And unfortunately, when you do that, you get these kinds of results. I mean, you can do a direct, map from A to B on that accident. The gentleman who was the pilot in command really should not have been there that evening.
Yeah.
And he did some things that, under those set of circumstances, were violating some of the most basic principles of piloting 101. I don't have to get in the weeds on it, but the point being is that whenever you have an accident like that, things often change.
Right.
I promise you things will change as a result of the DC accident. They will change as a result of the Toronto accident. Bear in mind, just one point of qualification, that Toronto accident, because it happened in Canada, will not be investigated by the United States National Transportation Safety Board. It will be investigated by Transport Canada, who is their equivalent of RNTSB. But they're good at what they do, and they'll come out with a statement of probable cause in due course.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I mean, one, I know that deregulation is always popular as a phrase, but there are some things that, and listen, there's probably deregulation that's appropriate for the FAA. The supervision and the regulation of the airplanes and the airlines and the safety standards probably isn't one of them. I'm certainly not an expert in that. I mean, there's probably always too much red tape or something, but I don't know. I think, those privacy notices we get in the mail 3 times a year and the Graham-Leach-Bliley things, I hope I said it right. Basically those are enormous wastes of time and those notices, nobody reads them, killing trees, whatever. Airplanes maintenance, and upkeep is an entirely different thing about self-policing. Same with, trains and any mass transportation. The other thing is that when you initially talked about the military helicopter and the plane in the Potomac incident, and we're not getting into the weeds, but you did mention that it's been a problem for a while. So there's got to be, well, hopefully the answer is no, but if there are other things that have been problems for a while, is there somebody or is there some agency that's supposed to be ahead of them that's saying these are problems for a while, let's fix them before we have another tragedy?
One of the blessings and curses of our system of government is we have these independent agencies. We have federalism, right? States are separate from the federal government. The FAA is separate from the military. And one doesn't have jurisdiction over the other. That was one of the designs of our system of government that was fully intended. But it does have unintended consequences. And I want to be very clear about something. I am not advocating for more government, and I'm certainly not advocating for centralized government. Just understand that there's always a yin and yang to everything. And so when you have decentralized government, when you have different people responsible for different things, and you don't necessarily have this unified whole, there's costs associated with that. On balance, we've decided as a society that we're willing to bear those costs, but sometimes those costs come, at the cost of lives. What am I getting at? Well, the FAA has no jurisdiction over the military. Anything that the military does vis-a-vis the FAA is a matter of an agreement. And so the reason why, for example, if I, as a civilian pilot, fly my aircraft within 100 feet of a civilian airliner, at best, I'm losing my pilot's license.
Right.
At worst, I might be going to jail. The military can do that with impunity.
Right.
They can buzz an airliner. There's nothing the FAA can do about that. Oh, it's a bad idea, and the military pilot will likely be sanctioned. by her command, but the FAA literally has no jurisdiction over the military.
Right.
They don't control their airspace. The military can pretty much do what it wants to do in airspace. Again, there's a lot of very sophisticated agreements between the DoD, Department of Defense, and the FAA, but on balance, the FAA can't really do anything about that. Personal opinion alert, bias alert. In my judgment, no military aircraft has any business operating in such close proximity to civilian aircraft, especially when we're not in a time of war, and really there's no immediate circumstances that would require it. Personal opinion. Others would disagree.
No, that's fine. I would think that maybe there's some think tank or something, or even maybe the Association of Pilots or what have you, that comes up with a piece on things to be thought about, and that maybe there be a liaison office or liaison. I mean, easy for me to say and for that to happen. And when you create an office, then the office needs assistance and staffing, and then all of a sudden, what is a 3 or 4 person office becomes a 40-person bureaucracy, and then nobody wants that. But I don't know. We're not here to come up with the solutions. Just popped in my head.
It's an issue.
Yeah. The other thing that came up recently, and by recently I mean the last, 15, 20 years, as being something that seems to be a lot more dangerous to giant commercial planes than we previously knew, or I previously knew, was birds. So you were talking about ice earlier, obviously nature, and you can plan for that to a certain extent. Birds, I mean, how dangerous really are birds and planes together?
Bird strikes are not uncommon. They happen probably hundreds, if not thousands of times a year. Multiple bird strikes into an engine, especially a turbine engine, which spins at very high speeds, is risky. Everyone should know that jet engines are tested to a standard that most people couldn't possibly fathom. Bear in mind that jet engines on these what we call transport category aircraft, 787, 767, 757s, whatever. They're designed to fly for decades, literally tens of thousands of hours without any meaningful maintenance.
Wow.
There are aircraft out there that before they are salvaged or scrapped, spend literally most of their time in the air for decades. Those engines jet engines in general are very, very robust. But like any mechanical device, they can break under the right set of circumstances. During the course of testing of engines like this, they do fire chicken carcasses through the intakes purposely to try to break them. These engines can take a lot of chickens before they cut loose. And even when they do, don't forget these are multi-engine aircraft. There's more than one engine.
Right.
For a reason. This reason and others. However, if the engine's compromised, these engines spin at somewhere up to 30,000 RPM. The centrifugal force is extraordinary in a spinning mass like that, so when the engine cuts loose, it's a bomb. Now, the engine shroud around the engine is designed to contain shrapnel from the engine. Ordinarily, that's successful. If it's not, that's a catastrophic event. If the shrapnel makes it through the shield, then yes, the aircraft structure can be compromised, and indeed the shrapnel can and has killed people inside the cabin. It seems exceedingly unlikely. You're more likely to get hit by somebody on the way home. You're more likely to get struck by lightning. When we talk about failures of engines in these circumstances, we're talking about a concept called MTBF, mean time between failures. Millions and millions of flight hours before something like this would happen. The chances of you as a particular individual suffering a loss of life or injury because of something like this is nearly zero. Nearly.
Well, that's good. Do you do plaintiffs' work? Do you sue for victims?
Yes.
So what are you looking for in that type of case? I mean, how do you evaluate a case? in law school we were told res ipsa loquitur. So the thing speaks for itself. We're not exactly sure what went wrong, but something went wrong along the lines. But it seems like this is much more complicated than that.
In any air crash, more likely than not, somebody did something wrong. Again, aviation is a system. It's not just one thing or one person. It's think of it as a basket of many, many reeds. You can pull out a lot of the reeds, and whatever's in that basket is going to be there. But if you pull out enough reeds, then the precious cargo falls through the basket. That's the simplest analogy I can think of. But when an air accident occurs, there's lots of things going on at the same time. There's lots of causes for it. Aircraft can suffer catastrophic failure, and everybody can still walk away. Pilots can make incredibly stupid decisions, and everyone can walk away. And that's not fair. I shouldn't use the word stupid. For example, the accident up in Canada. The reason why everybody walked away from that aircraft is because the aircraft itself, and I'm assuming the pilots made some errors there. Maybe they did. Maybe there was something wrong with the aircraft itself. But the seats, the seat belts, cabin crew, that system did everything in its power and successfully ensured that everybody who walked away from that horrible fiery accident that we all saw play out on video. So my point is that there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but on balance, a lot of things often go very right to ensure survival of what most people would tend to view as an unsurvivable event. Captain Sullenberger up on the Hudson, and many, many years ago, probably before many of your listeners were even born, there was a flight called E.282 in Sioux City, Iowa. It was a DC-10 that suffered a catastrophic engine failure. And that engine, because of the manner in which it failed, destroyed the hydraulic system of the aircraft. Why is that important? Well, in order to fly the airplane and have flight controls, you need hydraulics. It didn't have any. Right. And the aircraft was literally uncontrollable. But through Captain Al Haynes' judicious use of something we call CRM, the medical profession uses the cockpit resource management. I think they call it something else, but they're ones that count sponges and clamps to make sure that, okay, we used 10 clamps, we got 10 clamps back, right? We didn't sew one up inside the patient. Same thing. It's called CRM. And through the use of that, he was able to actually get this crippled aircraft that was uncontrollable to an airfield where EMS personnel were waiting. Now, that aircraft was carrying over 300 people. 150 people did not survive that event, but 150 people did. That event has been programmed into flight simulators over the last couple of decades. Nobody has ever successfully landed an aircraft. Al Haynes did.
Wow.
So my point is that there's lots of things that can go wrong when there's a failure, but there's also lots of things that can go right. But if there's a loss of life, yes, there will be litigation. And yes, from a civil point of view, there will be accountability as we try to get in civil litigation. But you asked the question, how do we go about doing it? Usually we sit back and wait for the NTSB to start doing its job because they generally tend to secure and release a fair amount of information that would be very difficult to get otherwise. But everybody needs to know. Just because the NTSB says this is what happened, this is what went wrong, doesn't mean we can use that in litigation. In fact, as a matter of federal law, you cannot use an NTSB report as evidence in litigation.
Really?
It's precluded. And you cannot use NTSB investigators as witnesses if they're off limits.
So what
you got to do your...
Yeah, so what do you have to do? You have to get your own people to sort of do the same event. Are they allowed to look at the NTSB and see what they did as starting point?
The NTSB report's a matter of public record, and yes, we use the breadcrumbs, but we can't take those crumbs in the court. They can help inform our path, and frankly, sometimes we come to conclusions that are contrary to the NTSB's. But as you know, in civil litigation, the NTSB has a different role, right? They're not there to assign blame.
Sure.
The NTSB's job is to figure out what the heck happened, and let's figure out how we can prevent this type of accident in the future. It could be pilot error. It could be failures of the FAA itself. It could be metallurgy. It could be many things. It could be weather. It could be birds, like you said before. But their job is to figure out what the probable cause of the accident was and what's the best way to prevent a similar accident in the future. That's their mandate. They're not interested in assigning blame, and they don't. Not in the way that we lawyers think about it.
What's the federal statute of limitations, or is it a federal statute of limitations? I mean, how much time do you have from the time of the event?
There isn't one. It's based on state law.
Oh, we're in Maryland, so it's 3 years. So if the NTSB is going really slowly and you don't have the luxury of waiting, I mean, I know that they probably always go at a similar clip. Do you start your investigation earlier or sooner? I mean, is 3 years, in other words, enough? I mean, there's no discovery rule. I mean, you know when the incident happened. It happened when the plane went down or something bad happened at landing or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to file a saving suit, just to file suit and then stay it, while the investigation runs its course.
What are your criteria? I mean, in personal injury, you got people have cases that, they found a bone in their burger, to as much as, there's medical malpractice and they died. And, some lawyers take the bone in the burger case. Some lawyers, have different standards anywhere from, to take, routine car accidents to only, mass torts, all over the spectrum. What are sort of your criteria? I mean, if it's a rough landing and people get bounced around, but there's no serious injury, is that something your firm is interested in? Or is it, is there, I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but what's your firm looking for?
Catastrophic loss of life.
Catastrophic loss of life. Okay. Okay. So it's almost like medical malpractice in that there's got to be severe and permanent damages.
We take for granted now, and thank God that we can. Most of us get on an airplane and we're going to go from A to B, and we don't really think much about it.
Right.
No more than we get into a vehicle or a bus or a train, and we just assume that we're going to arrive there safe and sound. And you know what? You're probably right. But just like any other mode of transportation, there's risk attached to it. Aviation in particular, flying by definition is risk management. I don't care how you slice it. When you put flesh and bone and fuel and metal in the air and sling it along at 500 miles per hour, it's risky. What we sometimes forget is that ever since Kitty Hawk, we've gotten very, very good at managing that risk. We have. I don't want to be coarse in your program, but some of my pilot buddies and I, we still marvel at it every day. We call it PFM, pure fucking.
It's okay.
Pure magic. And it is. It's amazing. When you think about now, we can jump on an aircraft and be across the country in 4 or 5 hours. People died making that journey 150 years ago on foot. So it's remarkable. It's brought the world closer together. It's brought families closer together. But make no mistake about it, it's very risky. And that's why we have a system of like the FAA in place to help us manage that risk. And it's not just the FAA, it's industry, it's people like me. There's a whole cadre of folks out there who do everything in their power, flight instructors, to mitigate that risk. And that's a big deal in aviation. If you talk to anybody in this business, everybody understands that what we are doing is managing risk. Sometimes we don't do it successfully because some people, some organizations sometimes don't do what they're supposed to do. That's where we come in. That's negligence.
In the automobile tort industry, personal injury, others, premises liability, there's usually an insurance company involved, and oftentimes the insurance company provides the defense counsel. Is it the same? Is it the airlines have insurance companies that provide defense counsel? Do they have to retain their own, or is it sort of a hodgepodge?
No. There's always aviation insurers in there, and we, they're big companies, Lloyd's, among others, Global. These are big insurance companies, ones that write in the global markets, and even then, there's reinsurers behind them. Aviation insurance is, and I don't know a whole lot about it other than dealing with some of their counsel, but it's a fairly complex endeavor. the way in which aircraft in these accidents are insured is frankly above my pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't fully understand it, but what I do know, it's a multi-trillion-dollar market.
I imagine that if you are a commercial airline or a commercial shipping company and you have an air fleet, that it's required in the regulations that you have at least some minimum amount of insurance, which is probably fairly substantial.
It's very substantial, and yes, if you're an air carrier, if you have an air carrier operating certificate, then yes, you are required to carry a fairly. The smallest policy I've seen was $250 million.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That sounds about right. And that might only be for their own property damage, just to replace an airplane. All right. So, well, I don't know, but anyway, have you ever done defense work?
Yes, I started out my life doing defense work for a particular company. That was an aviation company. That's how I started in this business. But bear in mind, whenever I'm fighting with the FAA, that by definition is defense work. I'm defending people with and organizations with FAA certificates.
Yeah, we're gonna swing to that in a sec. I actually have, I think, what is my last question on, tort, airplane goes down, catastrophic injury. I am going on the presumption that it's a little bit like medical malpractice in that it's very expensive to litigate one of these cases and the law firm advances those costs.
Risky, yeah.
And risky. So that's part of the reason why you have to be pretty picky is that, it's not a great business model to spend more money than you're bringing in on a routine basis.
I tell some of my friends at the bar that my income's like a sine wave. So,
Yep. Go on.
They're risky. Like anything else, high risk, high reward, to be sure.
Well, let's talk about the other side of your practice, which is, as you said, defending people or entities with licenses. And I don't even know what it is, entities, but defending. So what is involved in that and where do you come in?
So the FAA is a regulatory agency, and like a lot of regulatory agencies, but be it the EPA, FCC, they're both a regulator and an enforcer of those regulations. And so the FAA is, as I said before, charged with air safety. And, the thousands and thousands of FARs exist. If they are violated, then indeed they will come after the certificate holder. They can do that in one of two ways. They can initiate what they call a certificate action, which means they are looking to either suspend or revoke your certificate, whatever it may be. And I said it could be a pilot certificate, it could be a mechanic certificate, it could be an air operator certificate. So, for example, flight schools have an FAA certificate to operate. They can try to suspend or revoke that. And bear in mind, if you're an air carrier, let's just say a Part 135 operation, we've all heard of NetJets, FlexJet, folks like that. If that certificate gets suspended for any length of time, they're bankrupt. It's that simple. So it's a big deal,
right?
Because they're grounded. And these aircraft, just like any other large piece of capital equipment, if it's not doing what you bought it to do, then all it's doing is costing you money. And airplanes, at the risk of insulting your readers' your listeners' intelligence, they're very expensive. You can't have them sitting on the ground. They got to be moving, otherwise they're going to ruin you. So the FAA will seek to either suspend or revoke those certificates. These are called air safety proceedings. And I should also add, they can also assess civil penalties. They can do either or both. They certainly have the power to do that. Once these proceedings get started, they're just like any other court proceeding, and the defendants, or they're called respondents in our world, they have a right to counsel. They engage counsel. I'm one of them, and we're off to the races. The good news is, at least for us, and this is a fairly recent development, believe it or not, the air safety proceedings are governed by the federal rules of civil procedure and the federal rules of evidence. As I said, that's a fairly recent development. The FAA, for many years, had a reputation of being a little heavy-handed in some of the proceedings, a little loose with the evidence that they would use to prosecute certificate holders. And something about 2 decades ago, that changed a little bit, and a couple laws were passed in Congress to say, hey guys, you really should tighten up things here. But for no other reason, that there's a substantial proprietary interest in these certificates. No, you don't have a right to fly. A pilot's license is just like a driver's license, but we don't pay $100,000 for driver's licenses, but for commercial pilot's licenses, we do. When all is said and done. So yes, the certificate holder, the license holder, certainly has a vested interest in it that's worth protecting, and they do. And indeed, there's some prepaid plans out there that would pay for the defense for airmen. There's some unions that provide those benefits to airmen, and there's obviously commercial liability insurance for certificate holders who get tagged by the FAA for alleged violations. So yes, in that manner, we do defense work. And I love tagging with the FAA. It's one of the great joys of my life.
I'm going to assume it's a little bit like a driver's license, where there's something like an administrative hearing at an office of an administrative law judge, and then you can appeal it to a federal district court. Am I close to being right about that?
Yeah. So here's one thing most people don't know. The NTSB, they have a role here. While the NTSB doesn't accident investigations, are arguably the world's premier accident investigator. I'm sure other countries would dispute that, but they're very good at what they do. But the NTSB is also a court of law, and the NTSB has a cadre of administrative law judges who oversee disputes between the FAA and certificate holders. That is the administrative courts in my world.
Does the FAA, do they also have staff attorneys, or is it assistant U.S. attorneys, or they have attorneys?
They have staff attorneys, so they work directly for the NTSB. They've got a great set of folks down there who know this area of law inside and out.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. It's a very specialized court.
I would imagine. Is there like an FAA police force?
I laugh at that question because in the context in which you asked that question, the answer is yes. But they do not have badges, they do not have guns, and they have no powers of arrest. They're called aviation safety inspectors, and they're the folks that roam around and find violations, if you will. But they're not police, although sometimes their behavior would suggest that they think that they are.
Understood. And the reason I ask is because, this was something I learned when I was a much younger lawyer, when I had friends who went into law enforcement and they were working for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the Department of Agriculture, and they in fact did have badges and guns. And I'm just like, whoa. And they're like, yeah, most federal agencies we have a police force. So, that's why I asked. The other question is...
Let me tell you something. If that day comes, I will personally turn in my own pilot's license.
Fair enough.
They're not guarding radioactive material, and I can certainly understand that necessity, but they're regulators. That is all.
They're inspectors. They're like highly trained housing inspectors, or whatever.
They're subject matter experts, arguably.
Yeah. And obviously, the answer to the next question is no, but air marshals, they are not FAA employees, or who are they, Department of Homeland Security, or?
Yeah, DHS.
Okay. I imagine there must be some liaison between the DHS and the FAA to coordinate that.
Maybe. I've never dealt with that issue. I couldn't tell you what they do and how they go about their work. Never encountered one. Hope never to.
Right. Well, I guess that makes my next question moot. Did you ever have to have a case with an air marshal that sort of went wrong? But the answer is obviously no. So,
the closest I got to that was a civil penalty action against a young lady who, I don't mean to chuckle. It's not funny, but she went a few rounds with a flight attendant, and we defend her. That was a civil penalty action, right? Because this was a passenger. She didn't have an FAA certificate, but they imposed rather. It was in national news for a while, but she really landed a couple of good punches on this flight attendant. Again, if the case is resolved, but that's about as close as I got. I don't think an air marshal got even. I don't think there was an air marshal on board when this happened, but when the aircraft landed, there was whole bunch of police officers at the gate waiting for her.
Oh yeah, we've all heard about those cases where there's an unruly passenger when they get there. That the police are waiting for whether it's the airport police or some other police department. How was the FAA involved in a passenger punching a flight attendant? I mean, would that be a regular law enforcement matter, or what was it?
Well, it would, but there's also federal aviation regulations that deal with this. We all hear when we get on board the aircraft, the first thing they tell you is that you got to listen to the flight attendants. That there's an FAR that deals with that in some detail. So the FAA. And it took jurisdiction over it. And because it's a civil penalty, right, that's separate and apart from any criminal proceeding.
Okay.
And the FAA felt that they needed to vindicate that particular aviation regulation and pursue her civilly.
So when you buy a ticket on airplane, if you are particularly unruly, it is possible that the FAA might fine you, or I guess, they could bar you from flying?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
They can put you on no-fly list. Yeah, absolutely. Just to be clear, when this incident happened, this was at the height of COVID,
mm-hmm.
when you marched to an airport, and from the time you walked through the front door to the time you arrived at your destination, you were treated like farm animals, yelled at, prodded, screamed at. That did nothing for aviation safety. I will say that loudly and clearly. I think that put a lot of people at risk. Modern air travel is not always that pleasant, and the COVID experience put an overlay on that pushed everybody to their breaking point. I'm not making any excuses for this young lady, but I can certainly understand why people ended up going at each other. That was unfortunate. I think it was a horrific public policy for which nobody has ever apologized.
I'm just still amazed that there's that kind of thing. I guess I shouldn't be. You go to a ball game and you get ejected. You can be barred from going to the stadium. So why not?
Well, true, but it's hard to eject somebody at 30,000 feet. You got to deal with it when you get back.
No, that part of the logistics I understand. That part I got. All right. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or there's something that you want to tell me that we didn't get around to that really is, critical or core to what you want to get across?
Just say that aviation, by definition and by statistic, is still the safest form of travel. You're in good hands. We have a great system, like all systems that can be improved. But on balance, it still is and remains not only the safest way to travel, the most efficient way to travel as well. It is, it's really quite remarkable, how far we've come in about 100 years. And all I can say is that, I get on airplanes a couple of times a week and don't think twice about it. And I don't think anybody else did either.
Great. If people want to find you or retain your services or explore talking to your firm, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I'm the easiest guy in the world to reach. You can reach me on my mobile. It's 410-804-1592. My email is my name, R-Schulte, R-S-C-H-U-L-T-E @SchulteBooth, SCHULTEBOOTH.com, R-Schulte@SchulteBooth.com. And my website is www.schultebooth.com.
And since this is federal law mostly, you could handle cases that arise out of anywhere in the continental United States, right?
We're all over the country.
What about international waters? Is it like the flag of the plane or where the plane lands or where the plane takes off? Or
that gets into something called the Montreal Convention. We would certainly deal with that. Those cases generally tend not to be too appealing because under the Montreal Convention, when aircraft crash in international waters, there's fairly strict limitations on damages. That's changing, but for now, they're risky cases.
I thought we were going to break some news that the court was exclusively in Atlantis. So it's with that and the Space Force plane, and we did a lot of work on this podcast. All right, the last question, which is tends to be a gotcha question for guests, but is absolutely not intended to be. Is there a song that you associate with what we've talked about that you would like to be the outro?
That's a good question.
It's about time, right?
Yeah, a song. I don't know, Van Halen's Higher?
Van Halen's higher. All right, you got it. All right, Robert Schulte, thank you very much for being on the show. You heard all of the stuff. It's Schulte Booth, right?
Sure.
Yep. All right. Excellent. All right, folks. If you're here because you're a fan of Roberts, or just because you're a fan of aviation law, or otherwise by accident, if you subscribe to Garden of Thought, generally you're going to get 3 shows a week for free. And the weekend show, called Garden of Thought, cleverly, used to be Garden of Doom. So if you think about it, it's sort of like if you turn on the History Channel around 7 p.m. and just leave it on until 3 or 4 a.m., it's sort of that range, that panoply of content, or a Gaia network. The midweek show, which is this one, is more like if you're old enough to remember the shows like 48 Hours and 2020, if they're still on, sort of like a magazine show where we approach a topic like this, which is, maybe a little bit less woo-woo, but sometimes there's woo. And then my favorite show, not short shrift to anyone, but it's the Gospel of Thomas or the Book of Black, which depends on who my co-host is, which is where I and either my co-host PJ Black or Mr. Thomas, who are both professional wrestlers, talk to people in and around wrestling about non-wrestling things for the most part. We use wrestling as an icebreaker and a crutch, but generally, hey, if the wrestlers of commercial pilot, we'll talk to them about piloting. If they want to talk about Atlantis, we'll talk to them about Atlantis. So it's fun. We've had some former world champions on and a whole lot of interesting people there. So anyway, thanks a lot. All of the shows are free. You can find them at the Wrestling Suit Network or Apple, Spotify, Podbean, Spreaker, Amazon, SoundCloud, you name it, iHeartRadio. It's there. So once again, thanks to our guests. You're going to hear Van Halen Higher next. Everyone, check us out next week, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you.